Okay, start this up. All right, good to be with you guys here again today. Wanted to cut that off early so we'd have time to get to you know, anything that you guys would like to see covered today. So I don't necessarily have something formally planned for today, but going by what I saw, um, on the poll, it looked like animation was big up on there. And let me maybe review the poll here. Let me share my screen. We can take a look at some things. All right, this guy. So this is the Atom demo. This is what happens when you put Unity in the hands of some really skilled people, and they usually have a demo team that are pretty much pushing the boundaries of what the engine can do all the time. And this is just one good example of that. But let's come back here to the polls. So I see that we have animation, had a lot of interest, general scripting, VR, game engines, and if you want to adjust any of those things, just please let me know, and I'll be sure to put some time in preparing some material there. But before I jump into animation, or if you guys have anything that you're especially interested in seeing right now, feel free to just speak up and let me know, and I can kind of just dynamically jump into that. And if not, give you guys a second here. Okay, well, let's jump into animation. Let's see. Do a little bit of cooking with Unity. So we talked a little bit about animation already in this class, but I'm gonna kind of dig into some other aspects of it, and I don't know, maybe round out your view of it a little bit more. And we probably won't have time to get to everything I'd like to do today. For instance, skeletal animation is a pretty big feature there. If you're trying to control characters and make sure they move the right way, right? There are a lot of details there. But we'll still use a lot of the same tools you would use in skeletal animation. We'll just focus on kind of a simpler use case to start off with. Specifically, we'll look at just animating a door, using some crude geometry we just put together really quickly. So yeah, animations, they're just a sequence of images. I think everybody's good on this. We saw before with Professor Darkin that you could have these sprite sheets, right, where you actually have each frame of the animation just embedded inside of a single texture. So you could do some nice particle effects. But typically, what happens when people are trying to create animations, whether it be for games or movies, is they take a keyframe based approach, right, where they really define like the key aspects that are kind of like all the points you got to make sure you hit throughout the animation, and then everything that's in between there, should just be able to be interpolated, or someone else can fill it in. Like if you think back to traditional Disney artists, right? They would actually have one guy who, he was like the head artist, right? He was the more senior guy, right? He would capture all these keyframes, and then the more junior level people would go in there and draw all the stuff that needed to happen in between to get from one frame to one keyframe to the next keyframe. And that was for still images. But when it comes to doing things on a computer, right, when things are in 3D and you don't have to draw them, right, the computer draws them for you, you have to have a way of doing those same types of steps, right? So interpolation, as you've seen before, seems like it's pretty straightforward, and for the most part it is. But if you have transformations that are happening for every joint, then each one of those needs to be interpolated. So here's kind of, you can imagine a shoulder, elbow, and a hand, and maybe the idea is the hand kind of swinging down, and you can see that each one of these would be interpolated in a different way, right? So it's not like you would just apply the same interpolation to every joint. It's kind of really, each joint is kind of independently animated if you're thinking about a character. And in a crude sense, I guess you could think of a ball falling doing something similar, although if you keyframe this, you might lose a lot of the physical movement that would naturally happen here. Like if you did linear interpolation, right, you just have this straight line coming in here, and you have this this zigzag kind of approach, which would not look great for trying to do physics. So looking at our door here, we've got Unity. This is pretty much just a cube that's been scaled up, and you can see that the origin, or it seems like the origin, is right at the place that we want to rotate around, right? Because when we apply this rotation, this yaw around the y, it's actually just rotating around that axis right there. And we'll get into these tools a little bit more, but I think let me look at this a little bit. So if we start at the beginning, I guess I can point out here that to start, we have two different views on our animations. One is something called a dope sheet, which is kind of like this little, just these pock marks right here. They're really just indicating where a keyframe is being placed. And we have this timeline, so it's saying, hey, over this period of time, at time 1 second into the animation, I expect whatever key this represents to have gone from the value that's specified there to the value specified here. But this is kind of a good view for artists to just look at their keyframes and not really worry about what's happening in between, right? They just want to be like, okay, I want to set my temporal landmarks, so to speak, and kind of lay them all out so I can see what should be happening where. And then once that is accomplished, you can actually switch your view. Let's see, where do I do it? Okay, there's the little curves tab down here, right? There's dope sheet and curves. And this will actually show you what the value is actually set up to do in between those keyframes, right? So we have some options here on how we want to do this interpolation. Immediately you can see that, yeah, we're using curves here. And if you remember from last quarter, these curves should look pretty familiar, right? They're Bezier curves. So let's jump from that quick. We're going to take a little bit of a detour here to talk about interpolation. I'm sure you guys, you're pros with vectors at this point. I can't see your faces, but I'm sure they're all smiling right now. There's to minus from, right? If we think about going from one vector to another, you could think about interpolation kind of being like that. We have the starting point and the end point. And if we take this and we add some percentage of it going in the other direction, you're going to go the other way, right? So it has a start, it has a finish, and you can calculate everything that's in between. And this is kind of the vanilla look that you saw before, right? We had kind of a weight here. We said, hey, it's going to be some percentage of the first point, and then it's going to be the complementary percentage on the second point. And the formulation that we used, especially for rays, looked like this, but it was exactly the same.
I'm having trouble
Thanks, Siri. Stop listening to me. Okay, so that's okay. That works for a straight line, but as you saw in Unity, we're not using straight lines, and you know, for a lot of motion, that may not achieve the effect you're really going for. Which is where you can think of taking another step. We're thinking of this in the same way. We're thinking about this as a place I'm going to start from. Let's say these little lines on the right are kind of showing you what the thing is you might be doing, and then there's the graph that actually shows you how that value changes over time. So if I said I'm starting from this point, I'm going to that point, well, I can see that the speed at which we go from one to the next, instead of being just a constant velocity here, is going to be dependent on these different curves. And these are generally referred to as either tweening or easing. You could see both of those kind of out in the wild. But people often use them to kind of add style or a better feel to their user interface or their user experience. You might have a button that like flies in from the side of the screen, but it's not necessarily doing that in a constant velocity. It might do something. Let's look at one of these here. I think these are kind of like overly dramatic here, but you can imagine a button flies into the side and then it kind of comes back and then it kind of settles in its place, right? It's this non-linear way of moving that can have a nice feel to it. And even if it's not like modeling a physical movement necessarily, a lot of these kind of look similar enough to it without having to worry about bringing physics into the mix. And along with the idea of where you're starting from and where you're going to is kind of the idea of how you start out of the gate and how you finish these things off, right? And so these are kind of known as something in and something out. Like ease in means generally refers to kind of going slowly when you start, speeding up, and then slowing down when you get out here. Or maybe I have it backwards. Sometimes I forget. In any case, like ease in might be slow coming out of here, and ease out might be slow going in here, or vice versa. But they're basically telling you how the value is starting to change around the endpoints. So in Unity, you could do this in code, or you could bring in tools. There's tons of stuff on the asset store for this. I know, like, well, there's tons of stuff, but I'm mostly bringing it up here because I want you to see, get a better feel for what's happening between the keyframes, right? So a Bezier curve is just another way of interpolating between these different things. And even though they might not fit the precise form of the way these things are laid out, they are laid out, can't drive here. According to the way the Bezier curve is set up. Right? If you can remember, there's control points that come out. You can kind of bend those around a little bit. And we'll play with that here in a second when we animate our door. I'm not going to play this again, but I put it here if you wanted to kind of go back and see it. Just kind of like a real visual derivation of Bezier curves. And we'll play around with this in Unity. Let's see what we got here. So here's me actually messing around with the Bezier curves. When you see these handles connecting both sides, it's kind of like saying that you have this symmetry between the two Bezier curves. This would be one curve from here to here. This is another curve. And the way to make them continuous is to not do what you just see in the video right here, right? I just broke that handle so that I can change this one independently of the other one. But you lose continuity between your keyframes. So I talked about this, and let's just jump in and get our hands dirty. All right. Make a new scene. And straight away, let's save this somewhere. No, not there. Examples. in class. All right. Okay, starting from scratch here. So I'm just going to do some simple setup to start off with here. I right click, create a cube, and I don't really like where that cube's at. Unity pretty much never puts it exactly where you want it. So the way I like to do this, and you might find useful, is that when you come along to any of the components that are in here, right, and remember that each of these little component sections are really just the things that are contained inside a game object. So I think a good kind of way to look at this, if you weren't thinking of it already, is that these kind of represent whole game objects as a container of everything in here, and then anything in here is actually individual components. So when you look at any of these components, you can right click on the header, and usually you have some options there. There's reset. I think you can actually click the ellipses here and it gives you the same thing, right? So I don't want to type 0 in there. I can just reset this and good. That's there. That's pretty much where I want it. I'm in the game view. I don't want to be in the game view. Let's make something like 20 by 20, and then I'm going to bump it down by half a unit so that it lies directly on the grid, just being precise about stuff. And what I want to do here is this is going to be the platform. I'm going to make a wall, and then in between our wall, we're going to make a little door that we can rotate around. So I'll try to do this quickish. Let's make another cube. Reset that guy. How tall do I want this to be? 4, maybe 3 meters, and you need to be 20 across, so I don't know how. I don't know, let's try that. And then let's see here. I would like to actually bump this up, and I could just type it in there, but I'm going to do something that I find really useful when it comes to aligning things, and that's to say that if I want this to be aligned kind of in a perpendicular way to something else, then it's really useful to come up to this gizmo, jump up like this, and now I'm kind of looking at it directly on the side, but this is still a perspective projection, so it's not quite as easy as it could be. I'll click that again, and now I've got orthographic view right here. So here's my wall. It's kind of interpenetrating the platform. And what I'd like to do is just make it hug this guy right here. So I'm just going to see if it'll snap by default. And to do that, you can hold down Control, and then I could drag this around. You can see it kind of jumping around individually. And it looks like if I drop it right there, it's right on it. And if you look at the numbers, you can see it's at 1.5, which looks pretty good. Let's see here. Now I want to get out of this, go back to perspective. My wall's sitting right here. Let's maybe now what I'd like to do is look at it from the top to position it. Let's go back to ortho, and I'll hold Control down and see if I can hug it there. That looks pretty good. And I might as well stay right here. I want to make another wall, and looking at all my geometry, the easiest thing to do right here would just be to make a clone of the thing that I already have. So that's what I'm going to do. The shortcut for that is Control-D to duplicate in Unity. I think that's kind of more of a Mac convention, but I guess Unity was born on Mac, so I guess that makes sense. Alternatively, you can just right-click, duplicate like this. And then I'm going to bring this guy over here. And now let's go back into perspective and look at that. That's going to be kind of a narrow door. So maybe I'll take this guy and I'll decrease the scale to 8. And then if I'm really lucky, this will just snap again. That looks pretty good. So let's go back like this. And now I got a little opening there for our door. Okay. So I think that is fine. Let's go ahead and make our door real quick. So I'm gonna do the same thing I just did before, but for the door. I'm going to Control-D this guy, so that made a clone. And my door should be 2 across. And let's move this guy into place. Maybe it should be 2 and closer to 3, I guess, or 2.5. That looks good enough. Maybe I'll make it a little bit thinner. All right, let's just use the tools. So not that. I left that at 0. All right, that's not what I intended to do. I'm still in ISO view. Let's go back to perspective. What I meant to do is hit R, which will let me scale. Now I want to go back to top view, orthographic, and then I'm gonna hold control and see what this does. That's too big, so I guess I'll just kind of manually do it. So I can eyeball that. You know, I'm gonna go 0.5, and then kind of come back here. So, all right. That's looks like a door if you use your imagination. All right. So what do we got here? We've got walls, we got a door, but we need to make this guy move. You can see that if I were to just rotate it right here, that may not be the kind of door that we're trying to go for, but it's a start. So let's see here. This is, at this point, I guess I think I want to warn you a little bit that Unity kind of has this legacy heritage of different systems for animation. So, you know, you can hear the word animator or animation or just Anna something, and they can all kind of blend together. I'll try to help you separate that a little bit here. There's kind of a few different ways to come at it. But let's see here. First thing we can do is we can say create. Should be animation here. So here's our options: animator controller, animation, animator override controller, avatar. You know, animation is what we want, and we could make it here. Not sure what the. Let's just go ahead and make it here. Just say this is my door animation, door movement. All right. And with that selected, we don't really have too many properties to look at here, right? I just made an animation out of thin air. It's got pretty much nothing in here. I could tell it's a loop, but that's not really very meaningful. So let me see if Unity will still let you do the old way. So you could, here, let me kind of redo what I did there if I did it too fast. One of the ways I like to add components, you know, if I don't have my mouse really quick there to just drag them over, is, you know, you hit the add component and do a fuzzy search. So I looked at animation. I don't think this will be in the engine for very much longer, although I don't see anything that indicates deprecated. I thought they were going to remove this. Let's not do this. This is generally not what you want. So I'm going to look for an animator, which is a little bit different. And this guy is going to be the same that we use for characters, and the same I'm going to use for this object right here. So you don't have two different ways of doing it. But when you think of this way of doing the animations, you have to have a few different pieces put together to make the whole thing work. You have to have a finite state machine, which is pretty much the controller right here. And then you have to have the individual animations that you play at different states. So let's just keep with what we were doing here and create the thing inside of here. We'll go back to create. We have an animation that we're going to use, but we don't have an animator controller. This and controller being the finite state machine. I'm going to say door controller. I created one of those. We've got the component on our game object here, and I just need to put the thing I just created on there. And at this point, there is a window that will show you what's happening in the state machine. If you were to double click the controller here or inside of the project section, right, it'll automatically open this panel. And this panel is not doing much of anything right now. So we have kind of some default states here that you can use. When this animation state machine starts, it'll be an entry, and if it ever gets to exit, right, it'll terminate the animation. But this is just a state machine, right? This tells the system what animations to play and when, based on some parameters, really. But we don't actually have the animation in here, so I'm going to go ahead and throw that in there for us to look at. And you could say create state. I don't really want to do that. So you can actually create states in here that are not tied to animations, but in general, most of these are going to be basically, they are a state and they are also representing an animation. Let's throw this door movement animation on here. I thought there might have been a way to do it from this menu, but that's okay. So all right, this is the world's most basic finite state machine. When it starts running, it goes and it plays the door movement animation. And that's it. So I guess the last thing here is that door movement actually needs to do something, because we haven't actually created the animating part of the animation yet. But let's hit play. I want to see if this visualizes. All right. So while this is running, you can actually see what's happening inside of your state right here, right? If I look at this, it's interesting that it's like resetting when I move it, but there's an indication of what's happening, so you can actually watch it live while it's running, which is pretty nice. So okay, let's get to the animation part. Maybe I'll clean up my scene a little bit. Cube 3 doesn't necessarily scream door to me, so let's do that. That is good enough. All right, got a door, got an animator that's telling us what to do. And the animator is kind of the thing that facilitates the finite state machine, or the controller, as it's called. And we need to actually make our animation do something. So if we stick with our way of opening windows being double clicking, I do believe that, yeah, so if you double click on the animation here, it actually brings up a new window here for us to play with. It's the animation. I'll dock it right here. This is kind of the stuff I was showing in the PowerPoint a little bit. Like alternatively, if you wanted to get these panels and you couldn't find it to double click inside of your project somewhere, you can always come up here to window, and then you can see, hey, here's animation, and then it brings up the animation window or the animator window. This is a flavor of the same thing. So yeah, this is already open. I have my animation door movement with pretty much nothing in here. I can use the mouse wheel to kind of zoom in and out of how much time we're showing here. But let's get cracking and make some keyframes here. So if I guess first thing is this panel is going to reflect what you have selected. So if I click the door, be like, okay. So I'm clicking the door. This says I'm looking at door movement. That should be okay. And you'll notice that when I did that, I believe this red button started highlighting. If I click off of this, no, maybe that was up there before. Okay, well, anyhow, to set the keyframes, you want to be able to set this record button, or at least that's one way to do it. And it tends to be kind of in one of the easier ways, I think. Let's see, if we hit play, you can see that this is going by the number of frames here. We're going from 0 all the way to 60 frames. Is there a different way to look at this? Maybe not in the dope sheet. Enable, disable scene preview mode. Okay. All right, well, the thing that we want to animate is the rotation. So I could say, hey, I want to add a property. The rotation is on the transform. I want to grab the rotation. And that could be something I do like that. So I would have just, I made a keyframe there. There's something at 0. Alternatively, I could just push this record button on, and now you can see that, oh, it still has rotation there. Okay. Now it's just watching for any changes I make, because if I make a change, it's just gonna drop a keyframe right where I have the timeline scrubber. So I'll bring the timeline right back here. I'll just move this around a little bit so you can see, okay, it added a keyframe there because it's listening. I don't actually want it to be changed. I want it to be at 0. So let's bring it back here. And let's see. So here's the number of frames. Okay, so if you come out here and let's just say that, maybe I'll go halfway. Say that, all right, when you're halfway, I want you to be rotated maybe 90 degrees, right? So right there. So, okay, it was listening because I have the record button on. And now if we kind of scrub through the timeline here, right, you can see that the animation is occurring. So that's pretty cool. And maybe what I'd like to do is just have this go back to how it was before. So maybe what I can do here is, should be able to duplicate these and just copy paste. No. What if I control drag? I don't use this all that often, but well, I'm sure there's like a nice way to do this, but I'll just do it like this. So I'll just do it from here this time. So transform. I already have rotation in here, so I don't need to add a new property. All I need to do is come in here and say that, all right, you go back to 0. Now if I play this guy, you can see this is what's happening. They're like, okay, that's pretty fast, so maybe I'll scrub this. Let's see here. There we go. So this is in seconds, not in frames. That's what I was looking for. Put this in frames. There we go. What's the sample rate? Sample 60. You can actually change that. Yeah, okay. Don't worry about any of this stuff. I have no idea what Ripple does. Okay, so that's moving pretty fast. And already I see something that kind of surprises me a little bit. That's the fact that on my dope sheet, I see that I've got keyframes that are just showing, okay, there's something for door rotation and it's got Y. But this one has a keyframe for the whole thing, which is kind of surprising. Not really a big deal, but apparently when it's recording, it just records the whole change for this, I think. If I take that out, right, this would have no effect. It's just kind of an unnecessary keyframe really to be there. I can take this out too. All right, so 1 second is pretty short. Let's go ahead and maybe make this happen over 2 seconds. So I can just drag this whole sequence of keyframes over there. And let's put this right in the middle. All right. So that gives us some sort of animation. And if we were to look back at our animator controller, you would see nothing because we're not actually playing this. I kind of forgot that. So we're making stuff happen in the scene view right here, but really, if we were to hit play, then we should be able to see it as we expected. All right, but it only did it once. Okay, so that executed our animation. Let's look at our door. Update mode. Okay. Motion time. Motion speed. Let's look at our animation. Just need to put the loop time on here. Is that gonna make it happen? Loop pose. Maybe it needs to be restarted. I'm gonna rearrange these panels so I can see both things at the same time, different views. I don't have to change this around. Okay, I guess you just couldn't do it while it was running. So, okay, there is a looping animation, but that's not really the door we wanted. And, you know, one of the takeaways from last quarter for you guys was kind of about how the transformations heavily depend on where the origin is at, right? So rotation is occurring because the origin is right there. And I didn't model this, so it wouldn't be necessarily, there's no convenient way in Unity really without using Pro Builder or something like that to change the pivot point. So you can actually mimic this just using a hierarchy, right? So instead of doing the animation directly on the door geometry, we could do this animation on an object that actually is at the place that we want to rotate around, right? And then make the child or the door a child of that thing. So I could come in here and say, let's just make an empty object, call it door hinge. And let's put the door hinge where we want. So yeah, combine these guys again, make some room. I'm going to look at this from the top, go into ortho view here. I'm going to reset this at 0. Get out of here, light. All right, so just eyeball it right there. It's probably fine. Now look at this from the top. It's at the bottom of the door, which doesn't really matter in this case. Like I could put this anywhere along this axis and it should do the trick. But I'll put it there just to be nice and in the middle. Now that I have that, if you do any kind of reparenting in Unity, it preserves wherever objects are at, and it does all the calculations so that now the transformation of one has the correct transformation relative to its parent, right? So I could just grab the door, drag it over here, and now I have a combination of the two things, right? So selecting door hinge, I could say, all right, that kind of works. And then at this point, I have the animation on the door, which I really want it on the hinge now. So one way to do that is instead of duplicating all our work, Unity generally supports drag and drop just about everywhere. You can take this animator right here along the header bar, click it, drag it over here to, well, that was a bad demo. Does it not let me take this animator for some reason? All right, so you do not want to be dragged around. Well, all right, let's try this. So if I right click on this and I say copy component, it's where you can drag and drop components. I'm kind of not sure why that wasn't working exactly. Root position, rotation, control, yeah, okay. Well, let's just try it with something else just to see if it's not happy about that component. That's weird. I guess if other components depend on it, I know that could cause a problem, but right, nothing should depend on the cube, the mesh filter. So let's try this. All right, so that's enough fails for one session. I'll come back to that later. Where were we? Yeah, so we have a door hinge, and I just put the animator on the door hinge, but I don't want it on the door. So let's get this out of here. And all the rest of this stuff can stay. Now, let's see. If I do this, you can see, hey, all right, let's go back to normal view. Go back to perspective. It's not perspective. There we go. All right, so now we're in perspective. Okay, that's pretty cool. Open and close, open and close. All right, but this, we probably just don't want door opening and closing all the time. It might be nice if this animation happened in response to something else. So let's try something here. Let's say that if any object were to come in front of the door, then the door would open. So we could say, first we need to define that volume. So I'll make a new object. And I'm going to do this by making something I can see, like, what should I do? I should do like a sphere. No, I'll do a cube. All right. Reset this cube. Let's bring it back a little bit. And now I want this cube to basically define all the space where you can stand in that will cause the door to open. So I'll just eyeball this one. Let's just scale it a little bit like this. That's not what I wanted to touch. Something like that. And let's make it like this. And now I want to, okay, let's look at it from the top. Let's look at it from the front. Looks good enough. All right. So I don't really want a big block in my scene, right? I just have this in here to kind of help see what's going on. What I really want is to have this a collider, which defines the volume in a sense for the physics system, right? The collider has no response. It's just saying, hey, this is something that can interact and play with the physics system, and you could know about in those terms. So I could come in here, and that shows my volume. Great, but I don't want this anymore. So let's get rid of the mesh renderer and the mesh filter. All right. Now, there's my volume right there. It might have just been easier to play with it like this, but sometimes wireframes can be a little bit hard to judge. You can see the little points on here, right? Those can be yanked around. Cool. So there's a volume there. Now I would like to know when something walks inside of my volume. And if you guys remember from physics, or a physics session, this is where we need to look at unity physics matrix. Not that kind of matrix. This is what I want. No? Yes. No, that's not it. I think it's in the colliders manual. Yeah, this guy. All right. Right, so there's two sections in here for you to look at. There's one that tells you about the actual collision detection, and these are for things that actually are meant to interact with the physics. And then the other thing is just kind of a notification. It's a trigger. It's saying, hey, you can recognize that something's in that volume that I've defined, right? But I don't necessarily need you to apply forces or anything like that. All I want to do is know about it. So what I want to do is make our volume be something that just uses this side and not the collision one. So we come back here, make sure is trigger is checked, and it's pretty much just that checkbox that makes all the difference. And I could just make something in here just to test. Actually, let's bring this back. And then say that this is my trigger volume. And if I don't have it as a trigger and I hit play, it's sitting there. Does it have no rigid body? No. So let's give it a rigid body, right? Colliders don't really do anything but define a space. If you want any dynamics to happen, you actually need to have a rigid body on here. So I'll do this just for demonstration. All right, so now that sphere is sitting on our invisible collider, right? The collision information and the visual information are rarely the same thing. So that's fine. Let's see if this will let me change this at runtime. Hey, it does. Cool. Now, the ball doesn't really care if it's there, right? It's still going to do its thing. It's just that because it's a trigger, it gives me the opportunity to go in there and be notified if a collision were to happen. So, okay, let's learn a little bit more. Maybe I'll keep sitting here playing with this guy a little bit. So in here, I'll say, let's make a new script. Set new script. Let's do it in here, actually. That one I don't have to go folder hunting. Say create C# script, and we'll call this door trigger. Let's fire this up. All right. Okay. So here we are back in the typical starting state. We've got some class that inherits from mono behavior, and mono behavior is that thing that, you know, hooks into everything Unity. So we need to know what callback we can get in here that actually connects to the physics system. And Unity has so many, like Professor Darkin has showed you. But there are a couple from physics we could take a look at. And let me see. I have something handy here so I don't have to look at documentation, execution, order. All right. So if you actually wanted to kind of just take a look at what Unity is doing, I think this is pretty instructive. Let's take a little detour here and show this for a second. So I want to add that script I just looked at called execution order. And you can see that whenever these functions are called, these functions that are called by Unity, it'll actually print to the console. So as long as you've defined a function with one of the bespoke Unity function names, right, you may have an opportunity to get something back. Although this one doesn't look like it has the ones we care about for physics. However, let's disable that and that. Just take a look at that from there. Already contains the door trigger. All right. So we'll do the lazy thing. Call it door trigger 2. If great, there we go. Okay, so I didn't comment out fixed update. When you have something that is being called every frame, that really kind of clobbers the menu. Although there's collapse on here, but these are considered different because they're all unique with their number. So let's come back here. Let's get rid of that so I can look at this a little bit better. Okay, so you can see that awake was called on frame 0, on enable was called on frame 0, start was called on frame 1. So that's cool. Now we can see that these things are getting called and kind of get a feel for their order. Obviously, top to bottom gives us a sequence, but this also gives us the additional information of the frame that it actually occurred. Start is just basically guaranteed to be called once before update. So let's just, for curiosity's sake, look at when update gets called, if that happens on the same frame as start. So I don't remember. All right, so there's lots of update calls. I'm gonna come back up here. Start was called on frame 1, and immediately after, update's called. Okay, fine. So these are the hooks that we need, and there are some for physics. And let's go over here to the Unity documentation. And there should be something on trigger something something. All right, so I just want to know when a collider gets in there. I want to know when it enters. So there's collider on enter. Okay, and some wonderful example code here. Basically, I just need a function that is called on trigger exit, and it takes in a collider, and that will qualify for what we want to do here. So I don't want a color picker, but I'll go ahead and copy that. let's go to our door trigger. And I'm going to get rid of all this stuff over here. And let's just start off printing to the console. Looks like we're just about out of time here, so let's just test this out. Entered volume. All right. Okay, so then the next important step that you know, I still occasionally forget is you can write some code and that's great and you think your code does something, but unless your code actually gets to attach to a game object, nothing will happen. So let's do door trigger 2, add that guy on there. And now if we hit enter, right, so I click this during play mode. Anything you do in play gets reverted when you leave play, right? So you don't mess things up, but it's annoying when you do this. So, all right, that sphere went in there, but door trigger did nothing. Yeah, I think we'll have to pick this up from here tomorrow. And if you guys have any questions, you know, please speak up and let me know what kind of stuff you want to see. Otherwise, I'll just kind of keep going here in whatever direction I'm particularly see ahead. So let me get out of here. Stop share. Stop. No. Okay. Yeah. ProGrids would make my life much easier. Yeah, it probably would. You guys have any questions before we go?
Not a question, but a topic, like AI scripting.
Okay, let me come back. I'm gonna start the recording or stop the recording and then I'll jump back in.